Hi, it's V. Before we begin tonight's episode, dear listeners, let's talk about mental health. Getting a good night's sleep puts you in the right frame of mind to deal with life's challenges. But what about if your challenges are impacting your ability to enjoy your life? I've gone to see a counselor at times when I needed someone to talk to. The biggest challenge to going is the going part. I'm busy, and it's hard to make the time for a regular appointment, especially if I'm already struggling to deal with the basics. This is where BetterHelp online counseling comes in. Connect with your professional counselor in a safe and private online environment. Get help right from your bed. Snoozecast listeners get 10% off your first month with discount code SNOOZECAST. And if you sign up through our link, you're also helping support the hard work that goes into making our show. So why not get started tonight? Press pause or make a reminder to check it out tomorrow. Go to betterhelp.com/snoozecast. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor you'll love. That's betterhelp.com/snoozecast. Welcome to Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. We'd like to thank our listeners. If you enjoy our show, please write us a review on the podcast app. Also, share us with a friend. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on social media and wherever you listen to podcasts. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters and by a friendly hello. Tonight, by listener request, we'll be reading the third part to The Princess and the Goblin, a children's fantasy novel published in 1872. One of the most successful and beloved of Victorian fairy tales, George MacDonald's The Princess and the Goblin tells the story of young Princess Irene and her friend Curdie, who must outwit the threatening goblins who live in the caves beneath her mountain home. When we left off, the princess had met a mysterious old woman introduced to her as her grandmother. The grandmother keeps magical pigeons and eats their eggs. When the princess goes back downstairs to her nursemaid, she doesn't believe the princess's tale to be true. We'll start again at the beginning of Chapter 5. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. Chapter 5. The princess lets well alone. When she woke the next morning, the first thing she heard was the rain still falling. Indeed, this day was so like the last that it would have been difficult to tell where was the use of it. The first thing she thought of, however, was not the rain, but the lady in the tower. And the first question that occupied her thoughts was whether she should not ask the nurse to fulfill her promise this very morning and go with her to find her grandmother as soon as she had had her breakfast. But she came to the conclusion that perhaps the lady would not be pleased if she took anyone to see her without first asking leave, especially as it was pretty evident, seeing she lived on pigeons' eggs, and cook them herself, that she did not want the household to know she was there. So the princess resolved to take the first opportunity of running up alone and asking whether she might bring her nurse. She believed the fact that she could not otherwise convince her she was telling the truth would have much weight with her grandmother. The princess and her nurse were the best of friends all dressing time, and the princess in consequence ate an enormous little breakfast. "I wonder, Looty," that was her pet name for her nurse, "what pigeons' eggs taste like," she said as she was eating her egg. Not quite a common one, for they always picked out the pinky ones for her. "We'll get you a pigeon's egg, and you shall judge for yourself," said the nurse. "Oh, no, no," returned Irene, suddenly reflecting they might disturb the old lady in getting it, and that even if they did not, she would have one less in consequence. "What a strange creature you are," said the nurse. "First to want a thing, and then to refuse it." But she did not say it crossly, and the princess never minded any remarks that were not unfriendly. "Well, you see, Looty, there are reasons," she returned, and said no more, for she did not want to bring up the subject of their former strife, lest her nurse should offer to go before she had had her grandmother's permission to bring her. Of course, she could refuse to take her, but then she would believe her less than ever. Now the nurse, as she said herself afterwards, could not be every moment in the room, and as never before yesterday had the princess given her the smallest reason for anxiety, it had not yet come into her head to watch her more closely. So she soon gave her a chance, and, the very first that offered, Irene was off and up the stairs again. This day's adventure, however, did not turn out like yesterday's, although it began like it, and indeed today is very seldom like yesterday, if people would note the differences. Even when it rains. The princess ran through passage after passage and could not find the stair of the tower. My own suspicion is that she had not gone up high enough and was searching on the second instead of the third floor. When she turned to go back, she failed equally in her search after the stair. She was lost once more. Something made it even worse to bear this time, and it was no wonder that she cried again. Suddenly it occurred to her that it was after having cried before that she had found her grandmother's stair. She got up at once, wiped her eyes, and started upon a fresh quest. This time, although she did not find what she hoped, she found what was next best. She did not come on a stair that went up, but she came upon one that went down. It was evidently not the stair she had come up, yet it was a good deal better than none, so down she went, and was singing merrily before she reached the bottom. There, to her surprise, she found herself in the kitchen. Although she was not allowed to go there alone, her nurse had often taken her, and she was a great favorite with the servants. So there was a general rush at her the moment she appeared, for everyone wanted to have her, and the report of where she was soon reached the nurse's ears. She came at once to fetch her, but she never suspected how she had got there, and the princess kept her own counsel. Her failure to find the old lady not only disappointed her, but made her very thoughtful. Sometimes she came almost to the nurse's opinion that she had dreamed all about her, but that fancy never lasted very long. She wondered much whether she would ever see her again, and thought it very sad not to have been able to find her when she particularly wanted her. She resolved to say nothing more to her nurse on the subject, seeing it was so little in her power to prove her words. Chapter 6. The Little Miner. The next day, the great cloud still hung over the mountain, and the rain poured like water from a full sponge. The princess was very fond of being out of doors, and she nearly cried when she saw that the weather was no better. But the mist was not of such a dark, dingy gray. There was light in it, and as the hours went on, it grew brighter and brighter, until it was almost too brilliant to look at it. And late in the afternoon, the sun broke out so gloriously that Irene clapped her hands, crying, "See, see, Looty, the sun has had his face washed. Look how bright he is. Do get my hat, and let us go out for a walk. Oh dear, how happy I am." Looty was very glad to please the princess. She got her hat and cloak, and they set out together for a walk up the mountain, for the road was so hard and steep that the water could not rest upon it, and it was always dry enough for walking a few minutes after the rain ceased. The clouds were rolling away in broken pieces like great over-woolly sheep, whose wool the sun had bleached till it was almost too white for the eyes to bear. Between them, the sky shone with a deeper and purer blue because of the rain. The trees on the roadside were hung all over with drops, which sparkled in the sun like jewels. The only things that were no brighter for the rain were the brooks that ran down the mountain. They had changed from the clearness of crystal to a muddy brown, but what they lost in color, they gained in sound, or at least in noise, for a brook, when it is swollen, is not so musical as before. But Irene was in raptures with the great brown streams tumbling down everywhere, and Looty shared in her delight, for she too had been confined to the house for 3 days. At length, she observed that the sun was getting low, and said it was time to be going back. She made the remark again and again, but every time the princess begged her to go on just a little farther and a little farther, reminding her that it was much easier to go downhill, and saying that when they did turn, they would be at home in a moment. So on and on they did go, now to look at a group of ferns over whose tops a stream was pouring in a watery arch, now to pick up a shining stone from a rock by the wayside, now to watch the flight of some bird. Suddenly, the shadow of a great mountain peak came up from behind and shot in front of them. When the nurse saw it, she started and shook, and catching hold of the princess's hand, turned and began to run down the hill. "What's all the haste, nursie?" asked Irene, running alongside of her. "We must not be out a moment longer." "But we can't help being out a good many moments longer." It was too true. The nurse almost cried. They were much too far from home. It was against express orders to be out with the princess 1 moment after the sun was down, and they were nearly a mile up the mountain. If His Majesty, Irene's papa, were to hear of it, Looty would certainly be dismissed, and to leave the princess would break her heart. It was no wonder she ran. But Irene was not the least bit frightened, not knowing anything to be frightened at. She kept on chattering as well as she could, but it was not easy. "Looty, Looty, why do you run so fast? It shakes my teeth when I talk." "Then don't talk," said Looty. But the princess went on talking. She was always saying, "Look, look, Looty." But Looty paid no more heed to anything she said, only ran on. "Look, look, Looty, don't you see that funny man peeping over the rock?" Looty only ran the faster. They had to pass the rock, and when they came nearer, the princess saw it was only a lump of the rock itself that she had taken for a man. "Look, look, Looty, there's such a curious creature at the foot of that old tree. Look at it, Looty. It's making faces at us, I do think." Looty gave a stifled cry and ran faster still, so fast that Irene's little legs could not keep up with her, and she fell with a crash. It was a hard downhill road, and she had been running very fast. So it was no wonder she began to cry. This put the nurse nearly beside herself, but all she could do was to run on the moment she got the princess on her feet again. "Who's that laughing at me?" said the princess, trying to keep in her sobs and running too fast for her grazed knees. "Nobody, child," said the nurse almost angrily. But that instant there came a burst of coarse tittering from somewhere near, and a hoarse, indistinct voice that seemed to say, "Lies, lies, lies." "Oh," cried the nurse with a sigh that was almost a scream, and ran on faster than ever. "Nursey, Looty, I can't run any more. Do let us walk a bit." "What am I to do?" said the nurse. "Here, I'll carry you." She caught her up, but found her much too heavy to run with, and had to set her down again. Then she looked wildly about her, gave a great cry, and said, "We've taken the wrong turning somewhere, and I don't know where we are. We're lost, lost." The terror she was in had quite bewildered her. It was true enough. They had lost their way. They had been running down into a little valley in which there was no house to be seen. Now Irene did not know what good reason there was for her nurse's terror, for the servants had all strict orders never to mention the goblins to her. But it was very discomposing to see her nurse in such a fright. Before, however, she had time to grow thoroughly alarmed like her, she heard the sound of whistling, and that revived her. Presently she saw a boy coming up the road from the valley to meet them. He was the whistler, but before they met his whistling changed to singing, and this is something like what he sang. "Ring, dod, bang, go the hangers clang, hit and turn and bore, whiz and puff and roar. Thus we rive the rocks, force the goblin locks, see the shining ore. 1, 2, 3, bright as gold can be. 4, 5, 6, shovels, mattocks, picks. 7, 8, 9, light your lamp at mine. 10, 11, 12, loosely held the helve. We're the merry miner boys, make the goblins hold their noise." "I wish you would hold your noise," said the nurse rudely, for the very word goblin at such a time and in such a place made her tremble. It would bring the goblins upon them to a certainty, she thought, to defy them in that way. But whether the boy heard her or not, he did not stop his singing. 13, 14, 15, this is worth the siftin'. 16, 17, 18, there's the match and laid it. 19, 20, goblins in a plenty. Do be quiet, cried the nurse in a whispered shriek. But the boy, who was now close at hand, still went on. Hush, gush, scurry, there you go in a hurry. Gobble, gobble, goblin, there you go a-wobblin'. Hobble, hobble, hobblin', cobble, cobble, cobblin', hob, bob, goblin. There, said the boy, as he stood still opposite them. There, that'll do for them. They can't bear singing, and they can't stand that song. They can't sing themselves, for they have no more voice than a crow, and they don't like other people to sing. The boy was dressed in a miner's dress, with a curious cap on his head. He was a very nice-looking boy, with eyes as dark as the mines in which he worked, and as sparkling as the crystals in their rocks. He was about 12 years old. His face was almost too pale for beauty, which came of his being so little in the open air and the sunlight. For even vegetables grown in the dark are white. But he looked happy, merry indeed, perhaps at the thought of having routed the goblins. And his bearing, as he stood before them, had nothing clownish or rude about it. I saw them, he went on, as I came up, and I'm very glad I did. I knew they were after somebody, but I couldn't see who it was. They won't touch you so long as I'm with you. Why, who are you? Asked the nurse, offended at the freedom with which he spoke to them. I'm Peter's son. Who's Peter? Peter the miner. I don't know him. Why, I'm his son, though. And why should the goblins mind you, pray? Because I don't mind them. I'm used to 'em. What difference does that make? If you're not afraid of them, they're afraid of you. I'm not afraid of them. That's all. But it's all that's wanted. Up here, that is. It's a different thing down there. They won't always mind that song even, down there. And if anyone sings it, they stand grinning at him awfully. And if he gets frightened and misses a word or says a wrong one, don't they give it to him? What do they do to him? Asked Irene with a trembling voice. Don't go frightening the princess, said the nurse. The princess? Repeated the little miner, taking off his curious cap. I beg your pardon, but you oughtn't be out so late. Everybody knows that's against the law. Yes, it is indeed, said the nurse, beginning to cry again, and I shall have to suffer for it. What does that matter? Said the boy. It must be your fault. It is the princess who will suffer for it. I hope they didn't hear you call her the princess. If they did, they're sure to know her again. They're awfully sharp. Looty, Looty, cried the princess. Take me home. Don't go on like that, said the nurse to the boy, almost fiercely. How could I help it? I lost my way. You shouldn't have been out so late. You wouldn't have lost your way if you hadn't been frightened, said the boy. Come along. I'll soon set you right again. Shall I carry your little highness? Impertinence, murmured the nurse, but she did not say it out loud, for she thought if she made him angry, he might take his revenge by telling someone belonging to the house, and then it would be sure to come to the king's ears. No, thank you, said Irene. I can walk very well, though I can't run so fast as Nursey. If you will give me one hand, Looty will give me the other, and then I shall get on famously. They soon had her between them, holding a hand of each. "Now, let's run," said the nurse. "No, no," said the little miner. "That's the worst thing you can do. If you hadn't run before, you would not have lost your way. And if you run now, they will be after you in a moment." "I don't want to run," said Irene. "You don't think of me," said the nurse. "Yes, I do, Looty. The boy says they won't touch us if we don't run." "Yes, but if they know at the house that I've kept you out late, I shall be turned away, and that would break my heart." "Turned away, Looty? Who would turn you away?" "Your papa, child." "But I'll tell him it was my fault, and you know it was, Looty." "He won't mind that. I'm sure he won't." "Then I'll cry and go down on my knees to him and beg him not to take away my dear own Looty." The nurse was comforted at hearing this and said no more. They went on, walking pretty fast, but taking care not to run a step. "I want to talk to you," said Irene to the little miner, "but it's so awkward. I don't know your name." "My name's Curdy, little princess." "What a funny name. Curdy. What more?" "Curdy Peterson. What's your name, please?" "Irene." "What more?" "I don't know what more. What more is my name, Looty?" "Princesses haven't got more than one name. They don't want it." "Oh, then, Curdy, you must just call me Irene and no more." "No, indeed," said the nurse indignantly. "He shall do no such thing." "Well, what shall he call me then, Looty?" "Your Royal Highness." "My Royal Highness? What's that? No, no, Looty. I won't be called names. I don't like them. You told me once yourself it's only rude children that call names, and I'm sure Curdy wouldn't be rude. Curdy, my name's Irene." "Well, Irene," said Curdy, with a glance at the nurse, which showed he enjoyed teasing her, "it's very kind of you to let me call you anything. I like your name very much." He expected the nurse to interfere again, but he soon saw that she was too frightened to speak. She was staring at something a few yards before them in the middle of the path, where it narrowed between rocks so that only one could pass at a time. "It is very much kinder of you to go out of your way to take us home," said Irene. "I'm not going out of my way yet," said Curdy. "It's on the other side of those rocks the path turns off to my father's." "You wouldn't think of leaving us till we're safe home, I'm sure," gasped the nurse. "Of course not," said Curdy. "You dear, good, kind Curdy, I'll give you a kiss when we get home," said the princess. The nurse gave her a great pull by the hand she held, but at that instant the something in the middle of the way, which had looked like a great lump of earth brought down by the rain, began to move. One after another, it shot out 4 long things, like 2 arms and 2 legs, but it was now too dark to tell what they were. The nurse began to tremble from head to foot. Irene clasped Curdy's hand yet faster, and Curdy began to sing again. 1, 2, hit and hew. 3, 4, blast and bore. 5, 6, there's a fix. 7, 8, hold it straight. 9, 10, hit again. Hurry, scurry, bother, smother. There's a toad in the road. Smash it, squash it, fry it, try it. You're another, up and off. There's enough. Ah! As he uttered the last words, Curdy let go hold of his companion and rushed at the thing in the road as if he would trample it under his feet. It gave a great spring and ran straight up one of the rocks like a huge spider. Gertie turned back laughing and took Irene's hand again. She grasped his very tight, but said nothing till they had passed the rocks. A few yards more, and she found herself on a part of the road she knew, and was able to speak again. "Do you know, Gertie, I don't quite like your song. It sounds to me rather rude," she said. "Well, perhaps it is," answered Gertie. "I never thought of that. It's a way we have. We do it because they don't like it." "Who don't like it?" "The Cobbs, as we call them." "Don't," said the nurse. "Why not?" said Gertie. "I beg you won't. Please don't." "Oh, if you ask me that way, of course I won't, though I don't know a bit why. Look, there are the lights of your great house down below. You'll be at home in 5 minutes now." Nothing more happened. They reached home in safety. Nobody had missed them, or even known they had gone out. And they arrived at the door belonging to their part of the house without anyone seeing them. The nurse was rushing in with a hurried and not over gracious good night to Gertie. But the princess pulled her hand from hers and was just throwing her arms round Gertie's neck when she caught her again and dragged her away.